Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, episode 19, John and Olnap. We are looking for more people to interview, so if you're a DM or you know a DM that might be interested in coming on the show, you can check out more about how to apply at www.gocorral.com/sts. And without any further ado, let's get into the show. Today I'm interviewing John, who was the Dungeon Master when I first started playing D&D, so it's really cool to have you on the show. Hi, John.
Hi. It's fun to be here. You've interviewed some great GMs, so like I'm not in that caliber, so it's like, nice that you interview me, that you put me in that group.
Well, I have a lot of fun playing in your campaigns, so I think you are a good DM. We'll go through the usual questions for you, even though I sort of know the answers to a few of these. Usually we ask the guests to talk about who they are outside of D&D. So how about you give a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm a mostly retired techie. In my career, I've done two things that people may have encountered. One was the draw or play rule for Magic the Gathering, and the other was improvements to Google search. So like if you do a search and it like gives you answers for a different word than when you typed in, that was probably my doing.
Okay. What do you mean draw or play rule for Magic?
So this is where the first person doesn't draw a card. So the second person is the one. The drawing doesn't start until the second person goes. So in some sense, the first person starts in the middle of their turn. So our play group came up with this. I came up with this idea for our play group after first person won too often. And then one of us met the Magic the Gathering guy at the Hackers Convention and mentioned it. And then it got into the rules. It started being used. And then I knew someone who knew him and got confirmation. Yes, that was the path that got in there.
Cool. I thought it was the mulligan rule that you'd thought up, not the...
No, it was player draw.
Okay. Yeah, I do remember that story now. Thank you for reminding me. And Google, yes, I'm familiar with you doing a lot of different search stuff for that. Big part of what my understanding of you as an adult when I was a kid. How did you start playing D&D?
So I started later than most people. A group at my work had a campaign going, and I joined in that.
Mm-hmm.
The campaign never actually made a lot of sense to me. I started out with a ranger and ended up with a ranger who had wings and a cow's head, and I still don't quite understand why those things happened to him.
Okay, yeah.
My campaign building was in some sense a reaction to that. I wanted a campaign I understood.
Okay, yeah, that definitely feels more like a nonsense campaign for you to turn into a cow angel ranger.
And of course, this was like, advanced D&D. This was, pre-second edition, pre-everything.
Right. Yeah, we started off with second edition for our campaign.
Yeah, I had to. So when I first made my campaign, it was first edition rules. I had to convert it to second edition to run for you guys.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that you'd run it for another group before us. Was that was in first edition when you did that?
That was still in first edition, yeah. That was like
Okay.
End of the 80s.
Okay. Yeah. If I remember right, first and second were like the easiest to do conversions between.
Only conversion I've done, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, we changed to third edition for later on in ours.
Oh, we did? Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. Like we started off in second, but it was only briefly, and then we changed to third.
Oh, all right. I'll take your word for that.
Yeah. And third also wasn't that different from second, so it was another somewhat easy conversion. But if I remember right, first and second were actually like basically compatible from what I've looked at for them.
And of course, now I'm playing in your 4.5 edition game, which is totally different.
Yeah, that's a mess. Yeah, I feel like first, second, third, and fifth edition, you all can sort of do like sort of a sliding conversion between them. Fifth is probably the hardest to do a conversion from third to, but yeah, fourth edition is just like, no, you can't really just do a one-to-one change. Especially since they added another like 10 levels to it. Yeah, so I guess you answered how you started DMing. Were you DMing for that same group that you were initially playing with at work?
Yeah, I did. Initially, I did just like what I thought was a 1 day campaign, 1 day um, dungeon, which turned out to be like a 3 session dungeon. And then
Uh-huh. Yeah, the usual thing.
I worked on my campaign while I was supposed to be writing my dissertation because that was way more interesting.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
and then um, and then I picked up the group that I was originally playing with, or some crowd of that people, and that ran they ran in my campaign then.
Okay. And are any of those people, do you still play with them for your epic power stuff?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I've lost contact with all of them.
All right. Yeah.
We went our separate ways.
That'll happen. It's been a few decades.
About four. Yes.
Um, well, you want to give us a like physical description of the world and a name for it?
Sure. It's called Olnap, and World is giving it more credit than it's due. It's
Yeah.
a small part of things. So I'm not super creative. Um, and also, I had almost no information what a campaign was like, right? Because I only played this one campaign, which made no sense to me. So I basically saw a campaign as a place to put several dungeons. I didn't think much more beyond that, although things happen. Um, so, um, but one thing that we do have around here is the western headquarters of the U.S. Geological Survey, and they had a map room where you could go in and see every topo map they had for sale. And so I walked around the map room looking for maps with interesting topography. It just imagine like stacks of shelves all an inch apart with like topo maps on each one.
Hmm.
I'm on display. And so the most interesting map I found was for the Olympic National Peninsula in the upper northwest corner of Washington State. And you got this mountain, and you've got these valleys, and I think, oh, okay, the valleys can channel the party past my monsters. Lots of interesting topography here. So I, spent $2 or something like that on a map of Olympic National Park, which is where the name Olnap came from, sort of acronym for that. You can see I'm not especially creative.
Okay.
Uh, and then I just put the map down on the floor, and there was already a town of Port Angeles on the map, and I turned that into Angels Point.
Okay.
And then I saw a hill kind of over somewhere by itself. That became my town of Lone Hill, and then the one more town of Boulder. And I just sort of thought, okay, now what's going to be in these valleys? What kind of government structure will my towns have? Most of which didn't affect the campaign very much, but some parts did. So it was
Yes.
great. I had a cartographically accurate map of the world, which became my GM screen. I glued it to some foam core, um, and it all came for like $2.
Cool. Yeah. That's pretty neat. I never tracked down what it was, but I guess I was looking for islands, not peninsulas when we were doing it initially.
Right, you were all kind of the northern part of the peninsula. And then I didn't really have your guests have talked about like the importance of a calendar. I think I may have started keeping track of time for a while, but I'm not very good at that, and I kind of lost track. Um,
Yeah,
there's
I think my dad was the one that was actually doing that in our campaign, not you.
that makes sense. Yes, yes. He tried to bring me out of my ignorance in some places, and succeeded to some extent. So that was actually really helpful. Yeah. So basically, what the campaign was, your father, my father, and like 5, 9, or 10-year-old kids who started out kind of a little bit afraid, could they do this? And then 2 years later, we're a bunch of preteen rules lawyers. At which point I said,
Yeah.
"All right, you're on your own now, boys."
Yes, I do remember that. You were done playing with us when we were all snarky
Uh,
and talking back at you.
right. So no Pantheon to speak of. It was just the standard, D&D Pantheon, which was pretty bad at that point.
Right.
Um, and so mostly it was just a place to put, a few dungeons, and then a bunch of other kind of random things.
Yeah. Um, okay, so I remember the three different cities, but I also remember there was like this part of what we were doing before we got to Olnap where there was like the elven town that had been attacked by undead. Is that supposed to be like across the water from the Olympic Peninsula, like Victoria and that section of Washington, or
I don't
I guess
remember
that's
that.
Canada.
There was an undead attack on a town in Olnap. Maybe you're thinking of that.
Oh no, no, it wasn't undead. Sorry, it must have been. It was troglodytes.
Oh, okay. That was actually also in Olnap. There were
Oh,
troglodytes outside of Boulder. So yeah, the various things were happening. The party sort of dealt with. So there were troglodytes outside of Boulder, and the campaign dealt with them and made them very popular in Boulder. And they all got a piece of the rock for that.
okay. I thought that was. 'Cause I thought we were somewhere else, and we like took a boat to Angel's Point and then walked to Boulder from there.
You so the introduction of the campaign was you take a boat to Angel's Point,
Uh-huh.
and then at that point you got hired to guard a caravan
Mhm.
to go over to Boulder, which is sort of a way to introduce you to the various parts of the world.
Yeah, I
Uh,
remember that.
I was also very proud of the treasure map I gave you in Boulder in when the party first landed. Um, I don't like cliched things in campaigns like treasure maps. So I had this guy come up and offer you a treasure map to Sliff's treasure, this thief, and you forked over like 100 gold for it. And then someone else came up and offered you a different treasure map to Sliff's treasure. And then a third person offered you a treasure map to Sliff's treasure. So
I do remember getting some fake treasure maps and then feeling
yeah,
like,
granted.
whatever, it's just fake money I'm giving to these people anyways.
One of them, one of them was like the one that Sliff put in her chest to lead people to where the pyrohydra was.
Yes,
I
yes,
guess
I
when
do
it was
remember.
your party, the first party, they were sure there must be some treasure there. And eventually they went back when they were higher level and managed to kill the pyrohydra. But there was nothing there, but it just, a lure to go, to a nasty surprise for anybody who tried to sneak into Sliff's treasure chest.
Yeah, I was disappointed. All that work and we just got a Hydra meat. Okay, yeah, so we have a couple different towns. We had Angel's Point and Boulder, obviously. You want to talk about Angel's Point first, I guess, because that was the first town we came to.
Sure. So I had a little bit of a history from my world to try to figure out kind of why things were the way they were. And the history was that it had been run by a bunch of good clerics. Sorry, a bunch of lawful clerics. So the whole area had been run by lawful clerics, ranging from good to evil. And as you might imagine, they had some disagreements, and there was a big fight, and they basically killed themselves. And so Olnap is sort of coming back from that. And so the towns are kind of a reflection of how it had been. So Angel's Point is lawful good and neutral good. So it's sort of got the good part and the lawful part. Boulder is good, lawful to chaotic. So it's sort of the good side. The bad clerics lost. And then Lone Hill, the last town, was sort of chaotic good. So that sort of set up a little bit. I had a long history for Angel's Point, which you probably don't even remember. It's sort of the mighty run it, which were a bunch of fighters, and the thieves are the bureaucrats. They're called the fingers of the mighty, and the head thief was the thumb of the mighty. So everybody's operating under the thumb of the mighty. I'm guessing you never got that pun.
I'm remembering a little bit of this now.
So, and all three cities are sort of facing the mountain from different directions, and there's valleys coming down from the mountain that are threats to the cities because the bad things live up by the mountain and sort of come down periodically.
Right, yeah.
So then Boulder is on the west side of this. They're the kind of good city run by clerics. Between them is where the former cleric castle, the castle that belonged to the place is. And it's sort of this no man's land between the two. So it was sort of politically awkward for the party to be going into the old cleric castle on behalf of either city. And I just remember poor brother Timothy. You had a cleric in Boulder who was sort of in charge of managing the party, and the party
Right.
was always promised not to let the other city find out what you're doing, and then you'd always forget and then you'd come back, and Boulder Timothy would whack you with the Mace of Correction.
I
And
thought it was Brother George.
it may have been Brother George. I only know my wife Ann played them, and
Yeah, I think Anne was playing Brother George, and maybe Brother Timothy was her scribe or something. I don't quite remember the difference between the
okay,
two.
okay, that could well be. But yeah, the party never remembered what agreements they made, and was always falling afoul of it.
Well, yeah, we made that agreement like 3 weeks ago. How are we
Right,
supposed to remember it?
right.
Since then, we've been running around and learned division. Uh,
And then the last town, the chaotic town, I thought had a couple of interesting things in there. There was a banker who was lawful good. It's like because even in a chaotic town, you want your banker to be lawful.
right.
Um, and then there was like a bunch of rangers who were kind of the protection for the town area. And since it's a chaotic town, they don't really have a tax system. So the rangers sort of set up little blockades at the entrance to town, and they charged tolls to come in and out. And when the party arrived, the ranger asked them for 100 gold pieces a person to go into town. And from the ranger's point of view, they're chaotic, right? The last whatever they can get, they're happy with a couple coppers. But the party is all paying up, and your father says, "I'm trying to figure out the economics of this." At which point, one character said, "All right, I'm only paying 5 gold." And they said, "That's fine." And then the party ended up sort of becoming famous in town as the ones who actually paid full price to get in.
I think we actually kind of liked that town, but
I think you were a chaotic bunch. Yeah,
yeah,
I think it was your
yeah. I
favorite.
think we let Angel's Point felt like these guys have a bunch of sticks up their butts. Let's leave. Boulder felt kind of nice, and Lone Hill felt, from what I remember, there just wasn't a lot of adventuring to do around there. Like Boulder was a better like home base for adventuring.
Right, right. I mean, that's where the Sahagin threat was. That's near where the undead threat was.
Yeah, there's a lot of focus on the cleric castle. That was
Right. Um, yeah.
the big one.
So so I mean, like I say, I didn't put very much effort into the world, and I had no idea that you could do all this, right? I mean, this is pre World Wide Web, so the
Right.
only way you can learn stuff is to go to cons or buy books.
Yeah.
So, and on the one hand, so you couldn't grab pictures off the web or whatever. On the other hand, the expectations were quite low, right? All
Yes.
hand drawn maps on a table. In my current campaign, when I first started working on it, I had like a hand drawn map, and one of my players said, "Oh, it's a crayon map." I'm like, "Well, it has colors. That's better than I did last time." I've slowly come into higher production values, which are expected now, quite reasonably.
Yeah. There's so much stuff you can get for free for the battle maps if you're just okay with having the little watermark on it.
Right.
The
Right.
little ad for the map maker.
Right. I'm finding I'm now using about half free ones and half ones I make and incarnate.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes you need that to get what you want. Yeah. I still have that whiteboard that we would play on. Like ready to go in a bag for whenever we have in-person play sessions, which obviously never happens anymore. But yeah, that's cool. Of course, all the pens I use to draw on it are obviously are probably dry at this point, even though they have their caps on them.
Right.
Well, I think the like just dungeon placement and like filling up a dungeon is like I think that was pretty typical for when you were learning how to play. Like that's kind of what the original expectation was for first edition was that the players just go around to dungeons and um, spend a lot of their time just like interacting with the dungeon and not necessarily so much with the actual like world.
Right. I think that's true. And your father helped me get out of that, right? We had the Boulder Town Crier, which would have notice of
Right.
what's going on, and there'd be news about what the party had done, and the heroes of Boulder. They took credit for the party.
Yes. I'm looking at the Boulder Town Crier, and it's because my family had a newsletter back then too, and it's very clearly done using the same software.
Hey, I think your father was involved in the Boulder Town Crier.
Yes. Yeah, 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 that was cool. I remember that also. I think that was also part of like the homeschooling where we were writing stuff for the campaign, and that became like a part of our curriculum was to just sort of, okay, I need to write a page of some creative writing thing for this week, so I'll write an article for the town crier.
Ah, that may have been. That may have been. And of course, that let players get their viewpoint into things.
Mhm.
My son played an elf, played a dwarf, and he was always writing anti-elf screeds.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, John is the father of Will, who was the guest in the first episode, or co-host, I guess, for anyone trying to make that connection. Yeah, yeah. I think Ben came up with like a song or something because he was playing a bard at one point.
Ah, I think that's right.
Yeah, there was like whenever there was a festival, we'd all try to like come up with something creative to kind of draw attention.
Right. And again, a festival is not something I planned at all. The first run of the campaign, there were no festivals like that. And again, your father pushed on, hey, there should be festivals. It's like it's a town run by clerics. How could there not be festivals? Which, like, in retrospect, made a whole lot of sense. And so, um, those turned out to be actually something you guys really liked. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
the festival. And
yeah, definitely. I do remember that being fun.
so, yeah, I mean, I slowly got the idea of, okay, it doesn't all have to be in a dungeon. But I'm still not great at that.
Yeah, okay. It was one of my other questions because you have like a list of holidays that you sent here. So I was curious where that had come from. Was that like not in the first campaign? You made that up afterwards?
It was all made up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that and Brother George and a bunch of that stuff was made up. Pretty much most of all the dungeon stuff carried over, and the out of dungeon stuff was all pretty much made up on the fly.
That's cool.
And I'm not good at improvising, so it's made up on the fly between sessions, right? Not during a session.
Okay. Yeah, I'm saying that you basically just did a feast day for each of the different gods. Well, each of the different good and neutral gods, I suppose.
Right. Right. Yeah, and they may have done some other stuff. But I guess your father was keeping track of time, so you knew when the feast day was coming up, and you could have some sort of celebration.
Yeah. Pillsbury Day, patron god of bakers.
That sounds like your father's doing.
Uh,
I mean,
yeah.
that is one thing I find is that, so I'm, I really like doing some things and I'm good at some things and I'm bad at other things. Um, and by kind of getting content from the players, it really helps kind of flesh out the parts of the campaign that I'm not good at making.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember doing that a bit too, but it's been I don't know. The guys still come up with some stuff, but yeah, it's not as frequent, I think. I don't know. I guess I don't have as good a recollection of how much was actually used back then for what we were doing.
Right.
I wanted to talk about like the differences between the two different campaigns that were took place on Olnap.
Mm-hmm.
So one that I remember was the cleric castle where we like came up with this ridiculous plan to deal with the golem by you needed like a magic weapon to damage it, and we
Right.
didn't have any, or we didn't have any good ones. Um, so I was like looking through the book and said, hey, a battering ram is a weapon that deals the most amount of damage. Why don't we turn a battering ram magical and then hit it with the battering ram?
This is just after the um, Return of the Jedi came out, where there was a scene where the two logs smashed the Imperial Walker. And so that was your guy's idea. You ended up smashing it.
Yeah, maybe for the remastered one, because it's obviously not for the original release. Whichever remastered one that was. Yeah, that's probably where I got the idea from.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we had to. get the 2 logs, and then the clay golem like saw the logs and wouldn't move forward between them. So then we had to create like a shade, like a little duck blind thing, but higher, so it couldn't see the logs, but could still see. I think I was the one that was taunting it, so it would follow me. Um, and then that finally worked.
Right. So I don't think you ever knew until this moment is that I considered this to be a completely stupid, bogus idea. And I said, all right, it's only going to work on a 20. And then you guys rolled a 20. So let me give a little context for that. I like to give parties challenges that I don't know how they're going to solve. Because it's fun for me, it's fun for them. And the golem was a challenge like that. The key thing is the party has to be able to like, get away if they can't win the first time. And so the cleric castle, basically, as you went up floors, it got nastier undead, and the top is this clay golem, which, in the original rule was basically a monster that can only be fought by a high-level cleric, because it can only be hit by magical blunt weapons. If it hits you, your damage can't be healed by anything short of a heal spell.
Oh, right. I forgot about that part of it.
So there's just no way you can, at first blush, you could deal with this golem. But then also, golems in original rules had haste, so they could move really fast. I took the haste away, so you could run away from the golem. So I thought, all right, well, you could like have it chase one party member around the castle while everyone else is looting the top floor. There are various options for dealing with it. But yeah, both the parties found very different solutions, which I thought was fun. None of which was what I imagined. So there was a quicksilver of enchanting weapons that I don't know if your party found, but the other party found it, where you put a drop of this mercury on a metal weapon, and it becomes +1 for 1 hit. And the party also had a lawful neutral cleric who can not only turn undead but also take over undead.
Oh, that was the other party. That wasn't us.
Right. And the castle had a bunch of skeletons outside protecting it. So what they did is they gave each skeleton a mace, put the quicksilver enchanting weapons on it, and brought out the golem. Had the skeletons all attack the golem. And the golem is kind of like Sauron at the entrance section of Lord of the Rings, where he's whacking out, half a dozen skeletons in a swing. But the skeletons are all beating on him with their +1 mace. And just about the last skeleton took the golem down. And that was how they did it. And I think it was your party first tried freezing the golem in water. You got this ice stuff that would freeze water. One of the parties tried doing that. I forget whether it was yours or another one.
That sounds familiar, but I don't think we did that with the golem. I thought that was a different monster.
Okay. I thought it was the golem because you concluded that it had magic resistance because the water didn't stay frozen. But in fact, what it was is the ice only freezes for a limited amount of time.
Okay.
So then the the tree trunks were your fallback position. But yeah, I thought that was a great example of a challenge for a party that I didn't know how they'd solve, but it felt pretty open-ended, and people came up with like all sorts of cool, interesting solutions.
Yeah. I always felt like mostly what I'm doing with like encounter generation is like creating a puzzle that other people can solve. And it just has an open-ended solution. Like it's not like a Sudoku where like you're going to go through this process to get to the answer. It's more just, yeah, okay, well, you'll find a way there.
Right. And actually, the other thing is, I usually use the structure of my world to get the ideas because I'm not super creative. So I needed an explanation for how the cleric fight broke out. And basically, the evil clerics were making undead, and the good clerics didn't like that, so they made the golem. And then things are out of hand, and the golem killed a bunch of the undead and killed everybody else. And neither of them trusted the other because they had these big weapons.
Right.
And so that's how the golem ends up, fitting into the story.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense for the skeletons to be fighting it then, I guess, because that's like what it was made for originally.
In some sense, yeah.
Okay, cool, cool. So you mentioned the piece of the rock. That was like the little symbol of Boulder because they had the boulder.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it's named sort of for the insurance company that has Gibraltar as their symbol.
right. Uh, I remember there also being a like special gems that were found all around the Olnap that had some sort of connection.
Right. So that was my pathetic excuse for an overall goal for the campaign. When I was thinking of the campaign, it's like, all right, well, a campaign needs like a climax and some overall goal. And I said, all right, I didn't want it to constrain the alignment of the party members, which in retrospect, I should have said, look, yeah, don't play an evil character, but I didn't do that. So I didn't think of it, right? I mean, I had very little background in this stuff. So my idea is, well, okay, there is the luck of Olnap, which has been shattered somehow or other. And its shattering also caused the clerics to fall on each other and all that. And so it shattered into these 4 pieces, which are these 4 gems, and trying to get put back together again. And the party's task is to get the 4 pieces and reassemble them. And there's sort of 1 piece at each of the dungeons and 1 piece that the dragons got. The problem is I didn't actually give the party much hints about what was going to happen when you put the pieces together, right? You got like some dreams. Oh, it'll be great when you put pieces together. So the party is working for this goal, but there really wasn't any fantasy behind it because you really didn't understand what you're trying to accomplish or what would happen when you put them together.
Yeah.
In some sense, I would say it was a failure. I needed to make it more concrete, and I needed to also have it interact more with what's happening day to day to the party. Have more connection somehow. Have like if you have a piece of this thing, things are going to happen to you because of it, or something like that. So overall, I would say, it provided sort of a structure, but it was, I'd try to think of something better if I redid that. I try really hard to think of something better.
What? So when we put them together, that was like supposed to provide some sort of blessing to Olnap again.
Right. Things are supposed to start working well again and all that. And as I recall, each party member got a permanent +1 on their attack rolls, or a permanent +1 any one thing they wanted. That was kind of the reward for putting it all together.
Yeah, I remember that. And then the campaign ended, so it was like, oh, what do we do with that?
Yes.
Right, and like there was like a dragon that had one of the pieces, and I remember thinking, is the dragon the one behind the shattering of the gem or the luck?
Right. And I never came up with a story of what was behind the shattering of the gem.
Okay.
Shattering of the luck.
All right. Well, my dad designed campaigns the same way, where he would sort of just throw sort of a plot piece out there, but without any like idea of how he would resolve it. And the campaign didn't finish, so he didn't need to resolve it.
And in retrospect, it would have been good to have some idea of how the campaign would follow on. But again, when I was writing it, I had no notion of a long-running campaign. Whereas like the one I'm in now has been going for 3 years, and I'm struggling. All right, what could be the next thing?
Yeah, I almost feel like it might make sense for you guys to reset and test out the lower level rules for that again.
Oh, that would be an interesting idea. But I just generated like a dozen sessions worth of content, so I don't want to hear that idea yet.
Okay, well, I'll remind you in June or whenever. There was another thing I remember from like one of the first adventures was that there was like these ogres that had like were guarding a path to the dungeon we were going to. And we were too low level to deal with ogres. So there was a traveling salesman that went over to anyone that was going that way and would sell them like fake jewelry. So you could throw it at the ogres to distract them.
Oh, okay.
So
that was the 1-day dungeon. Yes, that was the 1-day dungeon.
Oh, okay.
Before Olnap. Yes, Joe's Jewels. Last costume jewelry before the pass.
Okay, yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Yes, yes. And actually, I think a few parties ran through that, and one party actually did kill the ogres. Um, and then they discovered their cave was just this huge mound of costume jewelry. And in there was one actual piece of jewelry.
How would you be able to find it?
And then of course, after that, Joe had been put out of business because there were no ogres anymore. So he was really mad at the party.
Well, he's got all of his stock back if he wants it.
Right, but no one's going to buy it now. Right, his whole business was making cheap-looking jewelry that could fool an ogre. That was another case. I mean, what I try to do is think, okay, given the situation, what does it prompt? What would make sense? It's like, all right, I'll put an ogre in a pass. Well, it's a problem, but ogres are dumb. So some entrepreneur is going to come along and deal with the fact, exploit the fact that ogres are dumb to make a business for themselves. So in some sense, the ogres are good for him. He likes the ogres.
Yeah, that's his business model. I'm solving a problem.
My another big source of ideas is just, I'll see something in the news or, something will come up and it's like, oh, I can turn that into a monster. So, for example, the last thing you guys encountered was the hopeful monsters. There were all these kind of fish-like monsters that each had different abilities.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
At the very end, and that basically my sister had mentioned to me that there are these bacteria that pick up little plasmids of DNA, little bits of DNA, and it might be good for it. And so they get some new ability, and it might be useful. And so I thought, okay, I'll turn that into monsters. So I had these fish monsters that would go and, they had various each one had different capabilities, and the one that had the gem was like, so there's a source of water, and the water had something in it that the monsters liked, and so the biggest guy was at the spring, and everyone else is just a monster eat monster world. And one of the monsters got the ability to speak, and so they
Yes.
the party, and then whenever the party killed a batch of monsters, their allies would go in and eat them, and become stronger. And both parties got progressively more nervous about their allies because their allies getting stronger and stronger. And it's like, what's going to happen when we finally take on the big guy? Will they actually become our enemies or not?
Yeah, I forget how we resolved that. I think we ended up talking to them and leaving them alone.
Your allies, I think, but you ended up killing the big guy. I think he wasn't going to give up that gem.
Yeah.
And by and large, your allies mostly just sort of said, you go fight them, we'll eat them. Let that party do most of the work.
Yeah, we were fine to do that.
But I thought that was fun because there was an excuse then to give you, every monster had a different challenge. And they were all custom monsters. You didn't really know what to expect with the next monster you encountered or next
Yeah.
monsters.
Yeah, I remember we were like our friends like took little bites of us to get like our abilities or something.
Right. So I think the friends initially said, "You bite us, we bite you, friends." Because the way it worked, the way the monsters worked is they bit somebody, they could get their DNA, and then basically for every level of monster you were, you got to express one more new attribute. So you sort of collect this bunch of attributes that you might express. Then when you go up a level by eating enough of your fellow monsters, you can express one more attribute. So they're always like trading bites to get a larger collection of attributes to choose from.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that was a really interesting one. I like that.
That was the last part to go in.
Yes, that was. Forget if that was last or if the dragon was last, but
The dragon was one instance where actually the world reacted to you. So in the dwarven mine, talk about a cliche. Um, there are all these different kinds of evil monsters that had been part of taking out the dwarves. And actually, one thing they were actually both chaotic. Some were chaotic and some were lawful, and
uh-huh.
they were not allies with each other at all. So the party could have gone in an ally with some of the monsters to fight the other monsters, but neither party tried it. Either run through. And I never gave anybody any hints that they should try to do this, right? Which in retrospect, I should have given some hints. I should have at least have a monster say, "Hey, look, I saw you beat up on the orcs, so you'd probably want to beat up on these guys too, because they're chaotic like the orcs were." I forget which way the orcs were in first edition. It's changed a few times.
Hmm.
But I'd never give the party a hint that they could actually ally with some of the monsters. But I wanted to figure out, how do these orcs survive in a mine with lots of much worse monsters than orcs? And so the solution was give them a powerful weapon, but then it has to be a weapon that's not going to be too powerful in the party's hand. So the answer was cruise arrows, an arrow that hits as if it was fired by a level 10 enemy. So as you level up, the arrow is progressively less valuable to you because it isn't
Oh,
it's just based on the enemy.
okay.
Because see, the orcs' problem is they can't hit anything. But now suddenly these orcs can hit something. And they had a ring of fire resistance. So the orcs don't like to shoot their arrows because they have a limited supply. But if they're threatened, they will shoot them. And the other monsters know that, so they'll stay away from the orcs. I worked really hard making the world consistent, and I think a lot of it you guys didn't notice, but some of it I think you did. Anyway, so you have
Yeah.
orc in a pool of flames with this fire resistance ring shooting at the party. And so you've got like a second or third level party at that point, running away from a small band of orcs because these arrows are hitting. So you had to come. So I had another challenge. I didn't know how you'd handle. I forget how you handled the orcs. I think you surprised them or something and managed to deal with them. And
I think I remember us getting a bunch of shields for that, so that we had like a
oh,
big shield wall and was just advancing slowly, so the arrows weren't doing any good.
I think that's right. Yeah. So again, you came with a unique solution to a problem that I didn't know how you'd solve. So you got the orc and you sold the ring because you didn't want the ring of fire resistance. But then you ended up getting strafed by the dragon, who was a white dragon, so ice weapon, a cold weapon, and you hit back with fire and almost killed the poor thing. So the dragon bought the ring that you sold. So that next time it was much studlier. It set an orc that it kind of knew off to buy this ring.
Little chain of buying stuff.
Long chain of you sold the ring back in Lone Hill, and there was a little bit of like half orcs could go between Lone Hill and the orc area.
All right.
He learns his rings for sale. He knows the dragon would love a ring of fire resistance, and poof, my dragon was a lot because you almost killed my dragon even out of his lair. So I had to do something to help my poor dragon out, and something. Oh, the party provides.
Man, we should have kept that ring and throw it on Conan so he could get fireballed.
Right.
I do remember the Dwarven Mine because that's where we got the group name, the Troll Slayers.
Ah, I forgot that name.
Yeah, we kind of stuck with it too. It's still like the name of one of our Discord servers. Like the one we're doing now is Epic Power, but the other one that you're not in is Troll Slayers.
Yeah. So one of the things they did in the mine, which neither party got onto, was it's like, okay, dwarves are stout guys. They don't care about stairs. So there were multiple levels in the mine, like, I don't know, about 8 levels or something. And different regions weren't restricted to one level. It was like there'd be 3 or 4 floors in one geographic subpart of the mine. Would be like where the rulers were or where the smiths were or where something else was. So the coherence wasn't horizontal, it was vertical, or kind of spherical.
Uh-huh.
But both parties that ran through the dungeon assumed that, okay, we just go down top to bottom, when in fact there was no top to bottom structure at all. So I don't know if there was a way I could have given more hints about that. Maybe Slift's notes about the mines could have, because you eventually got a hold of that, could have said something about that. I never quite imagined that no one would realize that level didn't matter. But I think it's just so ingrained in players that it's all about physical level that no one guessed that.
I think a harder part for that is that so much of the like original use of the mine was irrelevant to how it was occupied when we got there, because it was sort of just like a bunch of empty rooms that occasionally had monsters in them.
Right.
Maybe it's just like the actual organization wasn't important. It was just like, here, we gotta kill all these monsters, and
That's true.
it doesn't matter if we're killing them in a bedroom or a mine,
Right.
a tunnel.
And the monsters themselves were somewhat organized vertically as well. But of course, whenever you attack at one level, they all come up from the other levels. So from your perspective, you got them all at one level.
Okay.
And of course, this was all done with graph paper.
Yes, yes, I do remember a lot of graph paper from back then when I was making my own stuff too.
The cleric castle was round because I found some polar graph paper.
Oh,
Okay.
that's good. That's good. Yeah, that's stuff that's used for like uh temperature or seismic reports that like round like yeah has like the little like uh record player stylus that goes on it.
Ah,
I think that's what it's used for.
those are cylindrical, I think, mostly. But yeah,
Something like that.
again, the bookstores at colleges would have all this different kind of graph paper, and I kind of walked down the aisle and said, "This looks like fun graph paper. I'll put this in my dungeon." So wherever you can get the ideas from. Um,
Yeah.
now I get, I mean, in my current campaign, I have lots of stuff that you guys put in the first run of the campaign. Um, a whole arc that came out of one character's backstory. Um, a challenge coming from the upcoming arc that was another character's backstory. Um, it's actually, if you ever do get to run multiple characters through the same campaign, I think the second run through can be a lot better because you get a lot from the first run through. I didn't
Yeah.
do that in the Olnap campaign, right? I mean, what happened in the Olnap campaign is I ran it for some people, got it to its end, started in the GURPS campaign. Then my son was born, and he was not a sleeper. And I basically said, all right, I can't deal with D&D and my son at the same time. Yeah, this baby's just too hard. So I quit and only got back to it when he and you guys were 10. It's like, oh, okay. You were 9, I think. Right.
Yeah.
He's sleeping through the night now. I think I can do this again.
It only took 10 years.
Yeah. Whereas, I mean, either you're a much better parent than I am, or you have much sleepier kids than I had because you kept going right through parenthood. Quite impressed.
I think I just needed less sleep. Um, I was also curious about the conial material that you'd created
For the Dwarven
for
Mines.
Olnap. Yeah.
Again, it's basically mithril, right? I wanted there to be something, it's like you got a mine, it has to, I mean, it's complete ripoff from Lord of the Rings. You got a dwarven mine which makes some special mineral material. And I thought, okay, fine. I'll just call it Conil. And it was very hard to smelt. They had like a special magic chain to get their smelters hot enough.
Hmm.
And I think in the original campaign, I forget what it made weapons better in some way. And by second or third edition, there was this notion of cleave, which wasn't in the original edition rules. So it's all right. Conial gives you weapons that cleave.
I thought what conial did for weapons was it made them keen.
Oh, keen, yes, keen, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, where it's doubled the chance that you would get a critical hit.
right, right, yes.
Yeah.
I think maybe before it gave you cleave as a ability or something like that. I forget now, but
Yeah, cleave was the ability where like when you kill an enemy, you get to make another attack against someone else who's nearby.
right. Um, so yeah, um, in some sense, it's really incredibly derivative. I'm a little bit ashamed of it,
Well,
but
I mean, you could just have called it Mithril. I was curious why you went for a different name.
that's true. I went that far at least.
Yeah, like I've got Mithril in my campaign. And I don't, I have the Mithril mine that's overrun by Dark Elves, which is actually just a full-on module that I just plopped into my campaign world. That I unfortunately stupidly like the for this one the party was going to had some person that was going to take them to the mine to take care of it, and that person died on the way there. They didn't know where they were going, so I
Uh,
never got to use that adventure.
so in the first campaign, the one with the ogres and the costume jewelry, that one day, that short duration dungeon, um, I had a orc lair that was an abandoned mine, and you guys never visited it. So I moved that into, and I think no time I ran it did it get visited. So I moved that into Olnap. And then I moved it again in another campaign. So I made my own little module because it was like everyone needs an orc lair.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's like, yeah. The only part of it I think I was really proud of was that there's an Otiug character, I feel I pronounce it, a thing that sort of like eats trash and garbage and stuff.
Yeah, the little mouth with 4 tentacles.
Right. So it's like, oh, okay, well, that's where the orcs are going to put all their trash. Right? They've got a room with an Otiug and they just feed it trash. No need to
Yeah.
take it out or anything like that.
Yeah. It's a little trash compactor black hole thing.
Yep. So it made perfect sense in context. And no one ever encountered it because no one ever went in that module.
Yeah, there are all these like old like dungeon ecology monsters like the Otyug and Carrion Crawler, which was just like
Yep.
basically a caterpillar that ate garbage. Um, to try and like make the dungeon make sense as a place that people could live.
Ah, I never thought of them that way.
Yeah, because like something that lives somewhere needs like food, water, and a place to get rid of their garbage.
Right.
And theoretically something to do as well, but usually that involves just leaving the dungeon. Um, yeah, I remember trying to keep that in mind whenever I was designing dungeons. And I guess I still am designing dungeons. It's just most of the stuff you guys are doing now is actually outside for the current campaign.
Right.
But yeah, everyone needs food, water, trash, and something to do.
Right. I made one custom monster for that dungeon, the fearsome ferrite.
Uh-huh.
This was the monster that was basically a ball of magnetic mud, which could shoot pieces of itself at you, but didn't like to because it was costing itself. But it had a big magnetic field which would grab onto anybody who was armored, grab their armor. So it's sort of like a wimpy version of a rust monster.
Oh, this sounds familiar.
It was like in the bottom of the dungeon. It sort of moved in or something like that. And both parties sort of adopted it. Both run-throughs, the characters thought it was sort of cute. So as I recall, one run-through, the party put a crucible upside down on top of it so it couldn't go anywhere. And that way they could go through the bottom of the dungeon. And you didn't actually even need to go through the bottom of the dungeon, so it was fine. I forget which party did that, but both parties thought it was kind of cute, even though I named it the fearsome ferrite. I'm never quite sure why they thought that. But maybe because it just wasn't the standard monster and it was pretty easy to avoid.
Yeah.
I think the party that put the crucible on top of it eventually took the crucible off because they felt kind of sorry for it.
I don't remember what we did for it. I do remember finding a video of some like silly putty, but it was like ferromagnetic and more liquid than that.
Oh, like what's the thixotropic stuff? Cornstarch and water, but with
And not oobleck, but yeah, something like that, where it was made of a magnetic slurry, so you could put a magnet around next to it and it would like eat the magnet. And I thought that I can remember sending that to you and saying, "Hey, this is just like that monster."
Ah,
That was a long time ago though.
right, right. Well, I'm still like, I think you and I now are both going for undersea worms. There are some really nasty undersea worms that turn into wonderful monsters.
Yes, I am thinking of doing a adventure that's based off of trying to get some treasure from Atlantis
Ah,
for a short, instead of a big campaign, just like one adventure. And yeah, having some cool undersea worms would be good for that.
yeah, some nudibranchs. Um, there are just all sorts of. Um, I don't know if you can put the decapitating fly in there somehow.
Decapitating fly?
So these um, lay an egg on an ant's neck, and the maggot goes into the ant's like thorax or something and eats away, and then finally it pupates in the ant's head, and the head falls off, and then the fly comes out. It's quite horrible. And I believe it's leafcutter ants have like large workers that guard the runways where the minor workers are bringing leaves back. And there's a super minor worker that goes on the back of each major worker to protect it from the flies.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there's the mushrooms that take people over.
Yes.
That are all in The Last of Us and everything like that.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, worms, insects have all sorts of horrible ways they can die. But yeah, there are all these obscure branches of animals that you think like there's the vertebrates and there's the annelid worms and a few, but there's also these kind of very rare, the whole phylum of animals that have only a few species in them that have all sorts of really horrible lifestyles.
Yeah, I remember the planaria being an interesting one that I actually designed a monster for third edition for, where it's like a nasty worm, but in reality it's like 1 inch long or something. So it's like you just squish it, but when you size it up and say it's like 20 feet long, it's terrifying.
Right.
And if you cut it in half, then you just have two planarias now.
Right.
So I came up with this whole rule system for like you kill it. Now you just have two smaller ones that are because you killing it is just cutting it in half. So now you have two smaller ones that you have to deal with, and then you kill those, and then you have two even smaller ones you have to deal with.
Right. Well, there's a thing called a land planaria. I think I emailed you about it after I actually saw one on the sidewalk. They're kind of like
Yeah.
about earthworm size, but their head kind of flares out.
Uh-huh.
And they're nasty predators.
Yeah, that's where I got the idea from, was from you sending that email.
Yes.
Yeah, it looked, imagine.
For my current campaign, my main monster creativity was I decided to have monsters that could learn new body forms. So almost like Lamarckian evolution, which
there
is actually some of. So, so it starts out like a sea urchin, and then it visits other sea urchins who've learned to do different things, and it copies one of those and gets whatever appendages or whatever that thing had, and then if it really succeeds, it'll have a little bit better version of those appendages, which then someone else can come along and learn from it. So you end up with these things that are all genetically roughly identical, but in form they're all very different, and they're evolving very fast because they can essentially evolve via culture rather than via genetics.
Right. Yeah.
And that turned out actually to be pretty fun. So, the party's facing lots and lots of different kinds of monsters.
Yeah. Are you still on the urchin adventure, or are you somewhere else at this point?
No, that ended. I'm now on a adventure based on a 1 day of a run of my GURPS campaign. I had bought, so I'm running a fantasy campaign in GURPS, but I bought GURPS Space just for fun. And I thought, all right, how can I put a day worth of GURPS Space in my fantasy campaign? And so I decided, all right, these space aliens have landed, and they don't understand about magic. They understand about technology, about true knowledge. And they're basically trying to take over the world and persuade people that magic is dumb. And they've set up classrooms to stop people from being all the superstitious belief in magic. And they're overall a threat to the world. And so the party comes up and casts an earthquake spell. It just demolishes and just kills them all. And 1 week after that session, the 89 earthquake hit around here. And all the players just sort of felt sort of bad about what they'd done to the monsters. The next session, everyone was kind of sheepish. Wow, we cast an earthquake. That was really, really bad. Because everyone was really affected by the earthquake here. For a week, when you greeted someone, you didn't say hi. You'd said, "Where were you in the earthquake?"
Right.
So I've now expanded that to the aliens are actually how you originally got people on this world. And this is the third The third invasion, the first invasion, so they have to go through a black hole, and there's temporal distortion. So you only send something like every few thousand years. So the first one lands, but the technology breaks. So you get some humans, but really no technology. The second one lands, and the technology works. And so this isn't going to be broadcast for a few months, right? Because I don't want you guys to find out about
Yeah,
it.
not until something like June, so you're
Excellent.
good.
Excellent. So the second one, they get the technology, but they don't understand about magic. And so a bunch of mages, like including elves and people like that, basically take them out before they get much technology going. Now the third one has landed. And meanwhile, there was a traitor for the second batch and a defector. And so they have left a cache of high-tech weapons to help take out these guys.
Yeah.
So the party is going to go from like fireballs to, handheld shoulder-mounted missiles with psychic targeting. And they'll be fighting a guy in an exosuit. And meanwhile, the aliens' uranium mine has spawned a Godzilla, which they'll have to go after. But initially, they're just defending a town that the aliens have sort of got some allies to try to take over. So this was just a combination of expanding out the 1 day thing and reading the module that you suggested, the Red Hand, which is a fantastic resource. And
I
it's
think that was Jamie that suggested that one.
okay. It's hilarious to read. It's really well written, and I'm not using any of it literally, but it was just a wonderful source of ideas.
Yeah, I've heard that is a very good adventure series. Have you thought about doing anything related to like taking from the expedition to the barrier peaks?
Barrier Peaks.
Okay, you haven't heard of that adventure. Okay, so like it's one of the more famous module adventures that Gary Gygax made. It's about a UFO that like crash lands in your D&D world up in the barrier peaks. So then people go up to find out what's going on up there because there was like a shooting star that hit there, and then you find out that it's actually like all of the aliens died, but now there's all these like weird mutant monsters that are coming out, and the robots that were working there that are defending it. You have to like work your way through the UFO, finding like different key cards to move forward into the rest of the dungeon off of the dead aliens, and then you get to take like their laser pistols and use them.
Oh wow, I'd never heard of this.
Yeah, it's considered to be one of the like best D&D adventures.
Sounds very cool. Yeah, it sounds very similar like what I'm doing, except that in my case, the aliens survived and they're trying to take over the world, but they have a very small technology base because you can only take a small amount of mass through the wormhole. So their goal is, they've got a power, a power reactor, a refiner, and a synthesizer, a fabricator, and they need to get enough resources so they can start, doing a chain reaction of replicating those things to get more and more tech, instances of their tech going. And they're in the process of taking over 2 regions to be able to do this. So it's mostly, a lot of it is just political, and the party's going to have to ally with some, or probably want to ally with some kind of unsavory types because they need everybody to gather, to get together to fight off these guys. So they're going to, probably try to get the necromancers on their side, but the necromancers are annoyed because their their phylactery has been taken by the town. So it's like, all right, the necromancers will join the party if the party steals their phylacteries back from the town. So
That's cool.
Just trying to put a little more structure on it. And then there's some collaborators, and one empire, you move up, one area, you move up in government when you're the guy ahead of you is killed, kind of like the evil Spock Star Trek series episode. And so the aliens have a guy with a nerve gas droplet gun in a high-tech camouflage suit who makes the perfect assassin. So he basically makes offers to people in that government, says, hey, look, agree to work for us and your boss will be out of the way. So it turns out that that structure is highly vulnerable to the aliens. I made the structure first, but it's like, oh, that makes lots of sense.
Yeah. Did you? I mean, you talked about like bringing in things from previous campaigns that you've done. Have you brought anything into your current campaign from Olnap?
I didn't bring anything in from Olnap, but I brought something in from the GURPS campaign, the Audrey 2 ring. So this was after watching Little Shop of Horrors with the
Yep,
horrible.
I got the reference there.
And so the Audrey 2 ring, the D&D version of it, it doubles your experience point accumulation. So it's like super fantastic. But all the experience is actually going into the ring. So if you ever take the ring off, you go back to the experience you had when you first put it on.
Oof.
Right. I mean, which I thought it's a fair kind of curse because you've been getting double the XP, right? You've been lording it over your whole party, and now you're like back where you started.
Does it? Could you like move it around within the party?
Once you take it off, you lose all the XP. Once the character takes it off, they're stuck with it. They can take it off, but they lose all the XP they've gained. And the ring.
I mean, is it like in the ring? Could you like I gain double and then I give it to the wizard and now he's the level 30 wizard or something?
You gave it, and then the next person starts getting their accumulation goes up when they put it on.
Okay.
You only get benefit from holding it, but it's only a temporary benefit. And then the ring is going to start like demanding that you do stuff you don't want to do, like feed other magic items or do stuff or whatever. So the idea is eventually you're going to you're going to be forced to take this ring off, pretty much.
Yeah. Feed me, Seymour.
Yes. Yes. So that's another case. I'm not particularly creative, but hey, you see Little Shop of Horrors. I can turn that into a monster.
Yeah.
So my current in the original campaign, the party got really skeptical, and there was one player who had a sort of weird character who could break things with sound, and just broke the ring and pissed off the character who had it. But it was actually turns out so the party never found out what that thing actually did. And then in my current campaign, I think you guys encountered it. This was the ring that the mage had that he wasn't using, which should be a red flag that wait, why isn't this mage using this magic ring? That gave you experience points faster, but you ended up being basically a slave to the Lick who was trying to take over the world, Daruk.
Okay.
So that got moved over there. In some sense, there was the abandoned mine that the wizard was in, which is in some sense a reincarnation of that original orc mine way back first scenario.
Gotta have that.
Pretty much the same. Looks pretty much the same inside. I just kept putting it in there till someone went in.
Yep. My first adventure that I did after we left your auspices was also a orc mine.
Yep.
Crystal mine, but still.
Yep. I mean, you got to be, at least 80% cliches because you're just not creative enough to do anything else all the time, unless you're really good at it. But the 20% can be really fun.
I think what the players did was they waited for like the orcs to leave so they could go into the cave, see what was going on, and they killed all their children that had been left behind. All the orcs were out. Scared the orcs when they came back so that they could like leave. It was a weird adventure. I think we went through all my usual beats. Is there anything else you wanted to add or wish I'd asked you?
I don't think so. I think the overall point is, do what you enjoy and are good at, and find crutches for the rest.
Yeah,
It works.
Yeah, you're I suppose that we as the group are your crutches at this point because you're asking us questions all
Yes,
the time about what to
yes,
put
yes.
in.
And I mean, yeah, I always ask you guys questions, and then some of your answers are great, and I just put them in right away. And some of your answers suck, and I just quietly ignore them because I want to keep the great answers coming.
Oh, you didn't want to use the what was that stupid one I gave you?
I forget. I try to forget those as fast as I can.
Go into an empty room and except for a table and a cup filled with black liquid, and the cup has a note on it that says "Consume me." And the liquid in the cup is a virulent poison, and the solution is actually to eat the paper note.
Yes, yes. I don't like puzzles like that. That
Can't imagine why.
Now the truth is out.
No, it's a terrible puzzle. It's just a joke.
Well, thank you, Isaac.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show, John. I think we should have to have you on here again to talk more about Epic Power and Hoser, but I feel like that's a
yes, and actually,
whole separate thing.
so I have been working for the past like 5 years on a different rule system that makes more sense to me, I think, than D&D does. And if anybody's interested, they can email epicpower@johnlamping.com, and I'll send them a link, and they can see what they think.
Yeah, and that's the John Lamping is with a H. And that'll go in the episode notes too. And obviously the episode title will also have John spelled correctly. So we'll get it off of that. Yes, I would like to have you back to talk more about Epic Power and the setting for it as well. But yeah, it's a whole.
That would be great.
Yeah, but real quick, the main mechanic of Epic Power, just to entice people to go look at the rules if they're interested, is having much more of a true bell curve to how you have rolls for your skills. So it's much more GURPS-like, because GURPS has like the 3d6 system for rolling for your skills, so you're often more just going to hit that middle. And your custom dice are going to have like a middling range much more often, even though they can reach something at the far ends of the bell curve.
Right. So usually you get like -3 to +3, but we've seen like 15s and 16s. So an orc has a chance. It's also very nice that basically 2 monsters, if they have a small chance of hitting, you can just roll once and add 2 to the roll. So I'm playing now, groups of 10, just give them a +6, roll once. It works fine. And the other part of the mechanic is that your hit points don't go up with level. What goes up with level is Epic Power, which is something which you can spend so much of every turn to, avoid a hit, to increase your chance of a hit, to do various feats. And there are no character classes. You just assemble whatever you want out of a bunch of pieces. So generally, if people want new things, it's been like 1 or 2 pages of new feats to, do what's special about that class, and everything else you inherit from the rest of the rules. That's the goal.
Yep. Yeah. So it's very GURPS-like, but I would say there's less, maybe less choice paralysis at this point, because you're still at the initial like building stages for the system. And because you're designing it with like a fantasy bent, it's a bit more like focused in what's going on with it. But that'll have to wait for a more in-depth discussion another time.
Very
but
good.
thanks for coming on the podcast, John. It was good having you here.
You're welcome.